our actions ultimately, and our only focus is trying to find Madeleine. And there's an innocent child missing. That's what anyone thinks. That's the key thing. Madeleine is missing, and we're just doing our absolute best to maximise the chances of her being found.
What would it take for you to believe that two loving, respected doctors on vacation with their 3 young children accidentally killed their daughter, hid her body for weeks, and then fooled the world for 17 years while tirelessly campaigning to find her? If that sounds unbelievable, you're not alone. In this episode, we dive into the case of Madeleine McCann, not to defend the parents blindly, but to examine whether the public outrage has been aimed at the wrong people all along. The cadaver dogs, the media frenzy, the inconsistent police work. It's time to look at what the evidence doesn't say, and why the parents might not be guilty after all. To believe that Kate and Jerry McCann were responsible for the death of their daughter Madeleine, one must accept a cascade of implausible scenarios, each more extraordinary and illogical than the last. These are not minor inconsistencies or gaps in testimony. They are leaps in logic that defy reason, common sense, and human psychology. From concealing a body undetected to orchestrating a 13-year cover-up involving multiple individuals, the theory demands near superhuman deception without a single misstep, confession, or credible piece of evidence. Let us walk through what this theory truly requires you to believe and why it collapses under scrutiny. If Madeleine McCann had died sometime between 6 and 10 p.m. on the evening of May 3, 2007, the parents would have had to discover her death, process it emotionally, agree upon a cover-up, and conceal her body all within a span of roughly 30 to 45 minutes during a family dinner at a resort in Portugal. They would then need to dispose of the body so effectively that no one, not the police, not the media, not the dozens of tourists and hotel staff in the area, and not even cadaver dogs could locate a single shred of physical evidence more than 17 years later. Worse still, they would have had to accomplish all of this in a tightly surveilled environment. The Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz was full of tourists. Journalists flooded the area in the immediate aftermath. Surveillance cameras, local residents, and the hotel staff were everywhere. The couple didn't have a personal vehicle at the time. The Renault Scenic, that would later become the subject of much speculation, wasn't rented until 25 days after Madeleine went missing. This implies that if her body had been hidden before then, the McCanns would have had to return to the location weeks later, retrieve her remains, transport them discreetly, and dispose of them against this time permanent Lyle without anyone noticing or capturing a trace on camera, despite being under near constant watch by international media. And even then, there is no forensic evidence to support that a body was ever in the apartment or car. The cadaver dogs may have alerted in certain areas, but no matching DNA, no blood spatter, no bodily fluids, no tissue, nothing was found to corroborate the dog's reactions. It is simply unreasonable to accept that 2 grieving parents, under emotional duress and without criminal background or training, could perform such a flawless cover-up under public surveillance in a foreign country without leaving a single clue. Tapas 7. A group of close friends dining with the McCanns on the night Madeleine disappeared have often been scrutinized for their involvement or potential complicity. To believe that the McCanns are guilty, one must also believe that this group of educated, professional individuals, including several doctors and parents themselves, collectively chose to help cover up a child's death and deception of law enforcement, and not just in the heat of the moment. No, the theory requires that all of them, without exception, maintain this lie for more than 13 years. Not a single one has broken ranks. Not one has confessed, anonymously or otherwise. Their testimonies, while varying in minor details, as is typical in any group retelling, have remained remarkably consistent on the key facts. This level of coordinated silence is improbable in the extreme. These individuals are not career criminals. They are doctors, parents, and professionals with reputations, careers, and children of their own. If even one of them had a change of heart or fell out with the McCanns, the entire alleged cover-up would collapse. The idea that 7 unrelated individuals would risk their freedom, careers, and family lives to protect 2 people accused of killing their daughter defies not only logic but human nature. From the night Madeleine was reported missing, the McCanns were under a level of scrutiny few people could withstand. The media coverage was immediate and intense. International reporters descended on Praia da Luz. Every movement of the McCanns was monitored, photographed, and broadcast globally. The Portuguese police, Interpol, British intelligence services, and even private investigators were involved at various stages of the case. Under this spotlight, how could anyone, let alone a grieving mother and father unfamiliar with the terrain, smuggle a body out of their apartment, hide it, retrieve it weeks later, and dispose of it entirely without arousing a single suspicion? No CCTV footage, no witness sightings, no traces of transportation, no physical remnants of a crime. Even if you argue that Madeleine's body was hidden on the premises and then later moved, one must explain how they could do so while being filmed, followed, and hounded by paparazzi and police for weeks. There is no record, photographic or otherwise, of the McCanns engaging in any suspicious activity. None. If they had gotten away with it, the rational move would have been to fade from public life, let the case go cold, and quietly move on. But that's not what happened. Instead of retreating, the McCanns went on the offensive. They hired investigators, launched public appeals, established the Find Madeleine Fund, and continued to advocate for their daughter across newspapers, television, and even in the European Court of Human Rights. They did not disappear into the shadows. They filed lawsuits to defend their name. They spoke at press conferences. They organized anniversary events. They kept Madeleine's name in the public eye for over 17 years. Why would 2 people who got away with killing their child spend the next 2 decades doing everything possible to keep the story alive? This is not the behavior of guilty people seeking to escape detection. This is the behavior of grieving parents who believe against all odds that their daughter might still be out there, and they refuse to stop looking until they know the truth. To believe that Kate and Jerry McCann are guilty is to believe that they killed their daughter, concealed her body perfectly, did so without a car, evaded hundreds of journalists and law enforcement agents, controlled the statements and loyalty of at least 7 close friends, left no forensic evidence, maintained a worldwide public campaign for nearly 2 decades to deflect attention, and never slipped, confessed, or contradicted themselves in any meaningful way. All of this without a motive, history of violence, or psychological red flags. What's more likely? That 2 middle-class doctors pulled off the perfect crime in a foreign country while under global surveillance. Or that an opportunistic predator, possibly with insider knowledge of the resort, took advantage of an unlocked door and abducted a sleeping child in the brief window when no one was watching. The first option requires a suspension of disbelief, so extreme it veers into fantasy. The second, while heartbreaking, just tragically plausible. Until proven otherwise, the benefit of doubt must fall on the side of truth, not speculation. Madeleine's disappearance remains unsolved, but one thing is increasingly clear. The case against her parents doesn't hold up under the weight of evidence or logic. In high-profile criminal investigations, there is often a momentan image, a detail, a sound that grips the public's imagination and refuses to let go. In the case of Madeleine McCann, one such moment came in the form of a bark. Cadaver dogs, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition, were brought into apartment 5A in a rental car linked to the McCann family. They barked. They signaled. And for many, that was enough. Enough to form a theory, enough to cast suspicion, enough, even, to believe the parents were guilty. But a bark is not a conviction. And as we will see, the dogs barked, yes, but they didn't prove anything. Let's start with the most often quoted fact. The cadaver dogs alerted inside the apartment and near the boot of the McCann's rental car. But what did those alerts actually uncover? Absolutely nothing. As noted in multiple records and summaries, in the end no blood was found anywhere. Think about that, absolutely no blood. They couldn't even positively match the DNA samples they took to Maddie. No matching DNA, no blood spatter, no bodily fluids, no tissue, nothing was found to corroborate the dog's reactions. The dog alerts were unsubstantiated or inconclusive. In short, there was no physical forensic evidence found to back up the dog's signals. Not in the apartment, not in the car, not on the clothing, no blood, no bodily fluids, no hard proof of death, just a reaction, a bark. And while that might sound dramatic on camera, in the world of legal and scientific evidence, it means almost nothing on its own. The importance of expert context cannot be overstated. Martin Grime, the highly respected handler of the cadaver dog, Itty, himself acknowledged the limitations of canine alerts. No evidential or intelligence reliability can be made from this alert unless it can be confirmed with corroborating evidence. That statement cuts to the core of the issue. A dog's alert, in this case, is not proof. It's a direction, a lead, a flag, something that demands follow-up, but it is not evidence in the legal sense. Without corroborating DNA, without confirmatory testing, it is not admissible on its own as an indicator of guilt. This aligns with broader investigative standards. In any case, if you're going to accuse or even lean toward accusing someone of involvement in their child's disappearance, the bar for evidence must be exceptionally high. I just feel that if you're going to accuse, or even lean towards accusing the parents, you better come with some direct quotes, sources, and hard evidence. It is ethically and legally reckless to build a case solely on canine instinct. The same principle applies in drug cases, bomb detection, or any forensic situation involving animals. The handler must remain neutral, the dog must be validated, and the findings must be corroborated. That did not happen here. One of the most plausible explanations for the dog's alert is not that a body was present, but that something carrying the scent of decomposition had been moved through or stored in the location. As outlined in first-hand commentary, I think Maddie's body was in contact with the McCanns' clothing at some point. Transported those clothes in the car. Cadaverine smell could linger. With the summer weather, it multiplies and heats up, making the smell worse. This is not far-fetched. Scientific studies and field experiments have shown that cadaverine, the compound that gives off the odor of decomposition, can cling to fabrics, surfaces, and porous materials long after the body has been removed. For example, forensic tests have placed cadavers on carpets, removed them, and then had cadaver dogs alert to the residual smell weeks later, even after the carpet was cleaned or moved. Scent can transfer onto clothing, shoes, or belongings that were never in direct contact with the body, but shared an enclosed space. In this case, if any item the McCanns touched or transported had been exposed to cadaverine, even secondhand, the dogs might have reacted. That does not mean a body was stored in the car. It means the scent was there. The source, unknown. The cause, unproven. And most importantly, no forensic trace of decomposition was ever found. Now let's go a step further. Beyond this case, what does the science say about sniffer dogs in general? One 2011 report on the accuracy of sniffer dogs found alarming results. Prohibited drugs were found in only 26% of searches following an indication by a drug sniffer dog. Only 0.19% of indications ultimately led to a successful prosecution for supplying drugs. Let that sink in. Just over a quarter of alerts led to any discovery of contraband, and fewer than 1 in 500 alerts resulted in successful legal action. These figures underscore a major flaw. Dog alerts can be influenced by handler bias, environmental cues, stress, and even subconscious signaling. In the McCann case, it's not hard to imagine how the tension in the room, the expectations of the investigators, and the high-profile nature of the search could have subtly shaped the dog's behavior. If the dog sensed its handler's stressor, picked up on lingering scents from other objects, it could bark. And bark it did. But again, no physical evidence followed. The consequences of relying too heavily on canine alerts are not abstract. They can shape media narratives, ruin reputations, and steer investigations off course. In the court of public opinion, a barking dog is a siren call for guilt. Headlines screamed, "Body found," even when no body existed. Forums and social media drew conclusions from canine alerts as if they were DNA match reports. But in the real world, the legal world, the scientific world, the world that Madeleine McCann disappeared from dog alerts are the beginning of a trail, not the end of one. Let's summarize what the cadaver dog evidence actually gave us: a bark. No blood. No DNA. No tissues or fluids. No corroborating witness. No follow-up forensic confirmation. What we are left with is suspicion born of symbolism, not science. Even the handler admits it. Even the statistics support it. Even the complete lack of forensic evidence confirms it. In high-profile cases, symbols matter. Madeleine's stuffed cuddle cat, the shuttered apartment, and yes, the bark of a cadaver dog. But symbols must not outweigh substance. And here, the substance is clear. No physical proof was found to support the theory that Madeleine died in the apartment or was transported in the car. The cadaver dog alerts were uncorroborated, potentially indirect, and statistically unreliable. For anyone who clings to the theory of parental guilt based solely on a dog's bark, the question must be asked: is that really enough? Enough to override the absence of evidence? Enough to accuse grieving parents? Enough to accept suspicion as truth? Because in the Madeleine McCann case, the dogs barked, but logic, science, and humanity demand that we look beyond the sound. To understand why so many have questioned AMARAL's credibility, one must begin with a hauntingly similar case: the disappearance of Gianna Cipriano, an 8-year-old girl who went missing in 2004 in Figueira, Algarve, just a short distance from where Madeleine would vanish 3 years later. AMARAL led the investigation into Gianna's case. Her mother, Leonor Cipriano, was later convicted of murder, allegedly after her daughter caught her and her brother engaged in an incestuous act. But from the start, the investigation was riddled with inconsistencies, ethical violations, and eventually, accusations of torture. Leonor Cipriano was convicted based on a confession extracted under highly suspicious circumstances. Photos of her taken after police custody showed visible bruises and injuries to her face. AMARAL insisted that she had fallen down the stairs, but multiple sources, including later legal proceedings, challenged that claim. In fact, AMARAL was formally found guilty of falsifying documents and misleading the court regarding how her injuries occurred, though he was acquitted of direct physical assault due to lack of evidence that he was personally present. Regardless, the damage was done. AMARAL was seen not only as someone willing to pressure confessions through coercive means, but also as someone who appeared more focused on securing a conviction than uncovering the truth. This stain on his record would follow him into the McCann case for good reason. In 2008, less than a year after being removed from the Madeleine McCann investigation, Gonzalo AMARAL published a book titled The Truth of the Lie. In it, he advanced the theory that Madeleine had died accidentally in the apartment and that her parents had staged an abduction to cover up her death. The book ignited a media firestorm. For some, it became the foundation for their suspicion of the McCanns. But from a legal and ethical standpoint, the publication was deeply problematic. AMARAL was no longer in charge of the investigation. He had access only to partial information, much of it contested or unproven. His conclusions were unsupported by physical evidence. No body had been found, no cause of death determined, no charges filed. And yet, the book was presented not as speculation, but as a definitive narrative. His book is just his attempt to make huge profits out of this high-profile case. This statement from one reader encapsulates the backlash. The McCanns themselves filed a defamation lawsuit, claiming the book had caused devastating psychological harm to them and undermined ongoing efforts to find their daughter. Although the European Court of Human Rights later ruled in AMARAL's favor on the basis of freedom of expression, it did not validate the accuracy or integrity of the claims within his book. In effect, AMARAL monetized an open case and used his position to give weight to unproven allegations. In doing so, he further polarized public opinion and added noise to an already chaotic investigation. AMARAL's conduct, troubling as it is, did not exist in a vacuum. It appeared to reflect larger systemic issues within the PJ's handling of not only the McCann case, but other high-profile crimes in Portugal. Throughout the McCann investigation, critics alleged that the PJ had tunnel vision, fixating on the parents early on and failing to pursue other viable leads. The PJ was creating hysteria by making up random theories and speaking of them as fact. There were numerous reports of suspicious individuals lurking around the resort in the days leading up to Madeleen's disappearance, yet many of these accounts were not thoroughly followed up. Hotel employees, nearby residents, and even convicted offenders in the area were largely dismissed or overlooked in favor of a singular theory that the McCanns were responsible. In criminal investigations, a narrow focus unsupported by evidence is often the enemy of truth. It's much easier for him to blame others and close the case as opposed to accepting responsibility and actually doing his job. This insight reflects a broader criticism of AMARAL and the PJ at large, that they were under pressure to resolve a case of unprecedented global scrutiny, and in doing so, may have resorted to manufacturing narratives rather than pursuing facts. The idea that the McCanns had staged an abduction may have fit the frame, but it did not fit the evidence. This approach was reminiscent of AMARAL's handling of the Joanna Cipriano case, in which a compelling narrative was prioritized over verifiable proof. Even outside the McCann investigation, the PJ has come under fire for their apparent indifference to serious crimes, particularly those involving foreign victims. Take the case of Hazel Behan, an Irish woman who was violently attacked in 2004 in Praia da Rocha, not far from where Madeleine disappeared. Behan provided a detailed description of her attacker, including his voice, build, and behavior. Yet, the Portuguese police allegedly failed to investigate the case thoroughly and did not preserve biological evidence collected at the hospital. They were also more concerned with hiding crimes and protecting the tourist industry. This allegation, though grim, reveals a potential motive behind the failures in both the Behan and McCann investigations: the protection of Portugal's reputation as a safe tourist destination. If that's true, it suggests an institutional priority to control perception, even at the cost of truth. The involvement of Gons, alo AMARAL, in the Madeleine McCann case is inseparable from his record of misconduct, his questionable motivations, and the failings of the investigative body he represented. He entered the case with a documented history of coercive tactics, bias, and a willingness to draw conclusions without proof. He later profited from a still unsolved disappearance by publishing a book that made damning claims without forensic backing. And the organization under his leadership appeared more concerned with closing the file on salvaging international images and finding Madeleine. None of this proves what happened to Madeleine McCann, but it does raise a very serious question. If the man responsible for investigating the case was himself willing to distort the truth in another missing child, case-wise, should we trust the theory he pushed in this one? To build a case against the McCanns on AMARAL's assertions is to build on sand. And for a child whose disappearance deserves truth, clarity, and justice and not speculation, ego, and fiction, that is simply not good enough. Of all the strange and haunting elements in the Madeleine McCann case, few details are as unsettling or as suspicious as the resort's missing CCTV footage. While the disappearance of a child in a foreign country would already warrant an intense investigation, the fact that all surveillance footage from the resort either vanished or failed to record at all on the exact night Madeleine disappeared is not just alarming, it's deeply incriminating. As one commenter put it bluntly, the shadiest detail for me was the CCTV footage from the hotel the day Maddie went missing, which suddenly vanished, and some reports even said it stopped recording that day. The term, shadiest detail, is fitting. In cases involving children, especially in secure and tourist-driven environments like Praia da Luz, surveillance footage is often the first and most crucial tool for retracing movements, identifying suspicious figures, or spotting mistakes in routine. The very idea that an entire network of surveillance simply failed in the very day a 3-year-old girl vanishifies coincidence. Some sources suggest that the footage was never recovered, while others go further, stating it had been intentionally deleted or tampered with, perhaps even disabled during a key window of time. Whether due to technological failure, internal negligence, or deliberate sabotage, the result was the same: investigators were left without the one tool that could have provided hard evidence. But the missing footage raises more than just technical concerns. It opens the door to a far more chilling possibility. With no CCTV, no eyewitness to an abduction, and no signs of forced entry, we are left with a fundamental question. How could someone have known exactly when and how to strike without leaving a trace? One theory gaining traction is that the person responsible was not a random stranger, but someone within the resort itself, someone who understood the infrastructure, the routines, and most importantly, had access to the surveillance system. As one user put it, "I now think a hotel employee is likely involved." This isn't just wild speculation. There are several factors that support this theory. The perpetrator would need to know when the children were left alone. They would need to understand the physical layout of the resort, including the quickest escape routes. And crucially, they would need access or close proximity to the security systems in order to manipulate, delete, or temporarily disable footage. Maybe whoever is responsible or has access to the security system and surveillance saw the parents leave without Maddie through the camera. They then acted out their crime and came back to delete the footage. This theory suggests planning, observation, premeditation, and most importantly, inside knowledge. Who else could move so quietly in a resort filled with tourists, staff, and international media and still escape unnoticed? Who else could anticipate the window of opportunity with such eerie precision? One of the most often overlooked elements in the case is how predictable the McCann family's schedule had become. Every evening, they and their friends, the so-called Tapas 7, dined at the same restaurant within the resort. The Tapas bar was only a short walk from the McCann's apartment, and they rotated checking on the children throughout the night. It's not hard to imagine that someone, perhaps a staff member or local worker, noticed this routine and exploited it. They must have also had prior knowledge of Maddie and 2 babies staying in the unit alongside the parents. A predator doesn't always need to break in with force. Sometimes all it takes is waiting, watching, and understanding exactly when a target is most vulnerable. In this case, that would be shortly after the parents left for dinner, while the children were alone, asleep, and unguarded. They saw the parents leave without Maddie through the camera. The plan may not have been orchestrated in a single night. It could have been developed over several evenings of observation, waiting for the moment when conditions were just right: no adult supervision, minimal foot traffic, and most critically, no camera coverage. This was not a chaotic, opportunistic act. This was deliberate. It was calculated. And it was likely carried out by someone who knew the resort intimately. To further support the theory that this was a planned and possibly organized act, one need only look at other disturbing incidents that occurred in the Algarve region in the years prior to Madelein's disappearance. There had been 3 to 4 abductions, assaults in that area in the previous few years. These cases, many of which involved children or vulnerable individuals, remain unsolved. But they point toward a pattern of behavior, one that suggests pre-existing networks and possibly a trafficking ring that operated with confidence and precision. I really believe now that there was a trafficking gang, including CB, in the area, and that people were watching them and figured out their schedule, also from info in the Tapas bar, and when they could take a kid. Whether or not Christian BRÜCKNER was directly involved, the suggestion of a network with logistical knowledge of the resort fits eerily well with the disappearance of Madeleine. Trafficking gangs often have access to resources and contacts in hospitality, cleaning staff, or maintenance crews. They understand how to move quietly, observe patterns, and vanish without a trace. And if someone with such intent had access to the surveillance system, deleting or disabling footage wouldn't just be possible, it would be essential. In most criminal cases, the absence of evidence is frustrating. In this case, it is damning. CCTV footage could have revealed who entered or exited apartment 5A that night, whether anyone suspicious was lingering near the area, any interaction between staff or strangers and the McCanns in the hours before the disappearance. But we have none of that. Instead, we're told that the footage either didn't exist, was erased, or wasn't recording. That alone shifts the narrative, because it implies intent. It suggests that someone wanted to make sure there would be no trail, no evidence, no visual record, and that level of erasure cannot be explained away as coincidence. When viewed through the lens of logic, infrastructure, and behavioral analysis, the idea that an insider carried out the crime becomes increasingly plausible and increasingly chilling. Contrast that with the alternative theory, that Madelein's parents committed the crime, covered it up in 30 minutes, and somehow escaped detection in a resort teeming with guests, journalists, and police while dealing with the shock of losing their child. Which seems more feasible? That two grief-stricken parents staged an abduction while being watched by the world, or that someone who worked within the system, who understood the cameras, the routines, and the vulnerabilities of foreign families on vacation used that knowledge to make a child disappear. In a mystery clouded by speculation, the disappearance of the CCTV footage stands out, not as a footnote but as a flashing red flag. And in the absence of footage, we are forced to ask not just what was recorded, but who made sure it was never seen. In the decades-long mystery of Madeleine McCann's disappearance, few moments have been more scrutinized, replayed, and interpreted than a single, emotionally charged phrase. "They've taken Madeleine." According to reports, this was the first thing Kate McCann allegedly cried out upon discovering that her 3-year-old daughter was missing from their apartment in Praia da Luz. To some, it was a mother's instinctive, grief-stricken reaction. But to others, especially those who suspect Kate and Jerry McCann's involvement, it was taken as evidence of guilt. The reasoning goes like this: how could Kate have known Madeleine had been taken, that it was an abduction so quickly? Why didn't she say something more neutral, like, "She's gone," or "I can't find her"? The word "they" also raised eyebrows. Critics point out that Kate didn't just presume someone took Madeleine, she used a plural pronoun, implying more than one person. That, to some conspiracy theorists, was a giveaway, a script slipped up, a subconscious leak from someone who knew too much. But does this theory hold up under psychological scrutiny? Or is it yet another case of emotionally charged speculation outweighing logic, context, and basic human compassion? Let's break it down. A lot of people use Kate, allegedly saying, "Vi taken Madeleine," as proof that it was staged, because how else would she have prior knowledge? This quote captures a core assumption of the "parents are guilty" narrative, that any deviation from expected behavior is suspicious, and that what is said in a moment of crisis is somehow more telling than why it was said or how it was said. Indeed, it's true that in the immediate aftermath of tragedy, words are often fragmented, instinctive, raw. They come from the limbic system, not the frontal cortex. This is especially true for parents, whose protective instincts are some of the most deeply hardwired reactions in the human brain. So, let's reframe the moment. A mother comes into her child's bedroom. She sees an open window, an empty bed, and a stuffed animal normally clutched tightly by her daughter moved away from its usual place. In that flash of realization, her mind leaps to the worst-case scenario, not logically, not judicially, but viscerally. This could also have easily been the conclusion she came up with while in complete and utter shock. This is the central counterpoint to those who believe Kate's words were rehearsed. They weren't planted, they were screamed. Under the weight of what she was witnessing, her body surged with adrenaline, and her thoughts went immediately to the most terrifying possibility: someone had taken her child. This is not a scripted response. It is an emotional explosion, the kind seen in countless emergency situations where parents arrive too late to prevent a tragedy. In these moments, language is fragmented, symbolic, and emotionally saturated. The truth is, in psychological terms, panic reactions are often irrational but deeply meaningful. We don't default to calm, measured language. We grasp for explanations. We externalize. We name the fear. Kate McCann didn't perform for the police or the press. She simply reacted. When a mother walks into a bedroom and finds her child gone, logic is not the first response. The reaction is one of terror, shock, and a desperate search for meaning. The moment was not only defined by an empty bed but also by a disturbing, intimate detail, something only a parent would recognize instantly. Maddie's stuffed animal was moved out of reach despite her being tucked in with it, and also not going anywhere without it. To an outsider, this may seem like a trivial observation. But to Kate, this was not trivial. It was devastating. Maddie never slept without that stuffed animal. If she had simply wandered off, she would have taken it with her. If she had woken up and walked outside, the toy would be clutched in her arms. Its sudden absence from her side, moved or left behind, was a quiet scream in the room, a signal that someone else had entered, disturbed the scene, and taken Madeleine against her will. That's why Kate didn't cry. She's gone, she knew instinctively, emotionally, and perhaps even logically that her daughter had not left of her own accord. It has never been proven that more than one individual was involved in kidnapping her. One of the key critiques against Kate's phrasing is her use of the word "they." To conspiracy theorists, this implies she somehow knew there were multiple perpetrators. But this line of reasoning shows a deep misunderstanding of how language functions under emotional stress. In English, the word "they" is commonly used as a generic pronoun when referring to an unknown person or entity. If you come home and find your door kicked in, you might say, "They broke into my house," even if only one burglar was involved. It's not literal, it's instinctual. In Kate's case, "they" may have simply been the first available linguistic handle for whoever took her child, because the truth is, she didn't know, and that's precisely what made her scream so horrifyingly real. The grief, the confusion, the helplessness all condensed into one sentence. "They've taken Madeleine." This moment, Kate's cry, is not an outlier. It is consistent with what psychologists and trauma experts have observed in thousands of cases involving grief-stricken parents. But sadly, in high-profile cases, we often mistake raw emotion for calculation, especially when the parents do not behave the way the public expects. Some expected Kate to cry more. Others accused her of being too composed. And still others fixated on this one sentence, as though it were a legal confession, ignoring the reality that a mother in shock does not think like a prosecutor or a criminal. She thinks like a parent. And that's exactly what Kate McCann was in that moment, a terrified mother, whose world had just collapsed. "They've taken Madeleine" is not a confession. It's not a smoking gun. It is a cry of anguish, a linguistic echo of panic, trauma, and sudden, unimaginable loss. In a world obsessed with sound bites and body language, it's easy to take words out of context and place them under a microscope. But if we do so without empathy, without understanding the full emotional weight of the moment, we risk turning tragedy into theater and victims into villains. Kate McCann's choice of words wasn't perfect. It was human. And sometimes, being human is the only explanation that makes sense. In 2020, a new wave of hope and speculation surged across the globe when German authorities named Christian BRÜCKNER, commonly referred to as CBI, as the prime suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. For many who had long struggled to reconcile the narrative surrounding her parents, this moment felt like a breakthrough. At last, there was someone with a violent past, a disturbing profile, and a traceable presence near the scene of the crime. But was it enough? BRÜCKNER certainly stands out from previous suspects. He is not just a theoretical figure or a vague shadow on the margins of the case. He has a name, a history, and a known pattern of behavior that, on the surface, aligns disturbingly well with the facts of Madeleine's disappearance. And yet, even with all this, many investigators and members of the public still find themselves asking the same question: is it truly him? Or are we, once again, filling the void of evidence with a convenient narrative? He was recently convicted of an invasion in the same resort where Maddie went missing. One of the most compelling elements of the case against CB is his proven criminal history, and not just in theory. BRÜCKNER was convicted of attacking a 72-year-old American woman inside her vacation apartment in Praia de Los, the same coastal resort where the McCanns were staying in 2007. The similarities are chilling: a quiet residential apartment, an older female victim alone, and a methodical, predatory approach carried out in near silence. This alone places him in the upper tier of suspects. Unlike others who were implicated based on hearsay or proximity alone, CB had a record that matched the severity and nature of what could have happened to Madeleine, including his ability to enter a private space and disappear without leaving physical evidence behind. Mobile phone records placed him near the McCann's apartment about an hour and a half before Maddie went missing. The digital trail added another layer of interest. According to German investigators, CB's mobile phone was traced to a location near the Ocean Club Resort on the night of May 3, 2007. The signal placed him within close proximity to apartment 5A, approximately 90 minutes before Madeleine was discovered missing. In any serious investigation, presence near the crime scene is one of the first and most significant factors considered. It doesn't prove guilt, but it demands inquiry. When paired with his criminal history, this proximity became the foundation of the renewed investigation. He was in the habit of breaking in to rob hotel apartments in the area. Besides, BRÜCKNER had long been involved in theft and burglary, particularly targeting tourist accommodations in Algarve. This behavioral pattern, entering vacation apartments at night, often through windows or unlocked doors, matched the suspected circumstances of Madeleine's disappearance. Investigators believe the person responsible entered the apartment without force, moved quietly, and exited without leaving physical evidence. CB's history shows he had both the skills and experience to carry out such an act. In terms of profile, location, and criminal capability, CB was more than a person of interest, was a credible suspect. Despite the strength of the circumstantial evidence, there remain serious concerns about the completeness and reliability of the case against CB. Given the time of the phone call, given that he was 1.5 hours away, and given the time Maddie was discovered to be missing by her mother, I am not sure if it adds up to him having enough time to complete the crime. This observation captures one of the central logistical concerns. Was CB truly in the right place at the right time? While his phone pinged near the resort at around 7 p.m., Madeleine was discovered missing shortly after 10 p.m. That window of time over 90 minutes raises multiple questions. Did he remain in the area after the call? Was he alone? And if so, where was he before and after? Why did no one see him? Could he have committed the crime, escaped, and disposed of any evidence without detection? The reality is that presence does not confirm action. And in the absence of CCTV footage, witness sightings, or a physical trail, the timing of his phone usage becomes suggestive but not definitive. Despite years of investigation, no DNA, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage, and no recovered items have directly linked CB to Madeleine's disappearance. This is crucial. In high-stakes investigations, particularly those that seek to prosecute someone for child abduction or murder, physical evidence is paramount. Without it, any case remains speculative. CB has never confessed. There is no murder weapon, no trace of Madeleine in any of his known residences, vehicles, or digital files. The only pieces tying him to the case are his location on the night of the disappearance, his criminal history, an alleged comment he once made to a friend that suggested he knew what happened to Madeleine. But even this third point is tenuous. People say many things in prison. Boasting, lying, or attention-seeking is not uncommon. I also remember a similar story where someone confessed to killing John Bennett Ramsey and even bragged about it to prison mates, but was later proven to not be involved. This comparison is powerful. In 2006, a man named John Mark Carr claimed to have killed 6-year-old John Bennett Ramsey. He He offered details and presented himself as the long-awaited culprit. But DNA testing and further investigation completely excluded him from involvement. The lesson? False confessions, vague statements, and coincidental behavior are not enough to convict. CB, despite being a known criminal, could still be nothing more than an opportunist whose presence in the area makes him a convenient suspect. I am honestly not completely convinced that it was CB, either as vile as he is, but he is a better lead than blaming the parents. This conclusion encapsulates the most balanced take on CB's involvement. He is far from a perfect suspect, but he is a far more plausible one than Kate and Jerry McCann. He has a history that fits. He was nearby. He was capable. But in the absence of a confession or physical proof, Christian BRÜCKNER remains a suspect, not the solution. The public deserves answers. Madeleine deserves justice. And that will never be achieved by chasing narratives or scapegoats. It will only be achieved through evidence, persistence, and a willingness to follow the facts wherever they lead. When Madeleine McCann disappeared in May 2007, the world was gripped by one of the most high-profile missing child cases in modern history. Yet as days turned into weeks, and weeks into years, the attention shifted from the mystery itself to the people at the center of either parents, Kate and Jerry McCann. Despite the lack of legal evidence implicating them, they found themselves tried in the court of public opinion. This emotional conviction didn't stem from police files or courtroom proceedings. It was born and fueled by media narratives, speculative documentaries, and the ever-growing wildfire of social media. The earliest phase of the investigation into Madeleine's disappearance was marred by confusion, miscommunication, and critical police errors. According to some observers, the Portuguese authorities didn't do their job and allowed the situation to spiral. That vacuum of leadership opened the door for conspiracy theories and emotional reasoning to take over. In the absence of concrete developments, people filled the void with assumptions based on incomplete information. Public discourse began to focus not on verified evidence, but on facial expressions, tone of voice, and even parenting choices. As one commenter noted, people base their entire theory on tone of voice, body language, or the fact that she washed the stuffed toy. That quote reflects a central problem with public analysis: the tendency to assign guilt based on emotional cues or perceived abnormalities, not facts. To many, Kate McCann's composed demeanor became a symbol of deceit, while Jerry's insistence on maintaining a professional front was seen as too calculated. In truth, neither reaction should ever have been admissible in a rational discussion of guilt. When the justice system slows, people often seek justice emotionally. Unfortunately, in the case of the McCanns, this emotional vacuum created a climate where washing a toy or using the wrong tone of voice could become evidence of wrongdoing. One of the most influential modern tools in the propagation of emotional verdicts is the true crime documentary. Netflix's series on the Madeleine McCann case was widely viewed and praised for its production value and depth. However, its narrative structure, like many in the genre, had unintended consequences. While documentaries can help raise awareness and renew interest in cold cases, they also introduce a form of entertainment to tragedy. By selectively cutting interviews, dramatizing scenes, and hinting at narrative twists, these productions risk guiding the viewer towards certain emotional conclusions. Instead of leaving space for objective interpretation, documentaries often direct suspicion subtly or overtly, highlighting inconsistencies or theories without always explaining the legal irrelevance of such details. Viewers come away not only informed, but persuaded, consciously or not. As one viewer said, the Netflix series was very good. But good, in this case, also meant emotionally engaging, and that engagement sometimes clouds rather than clarifies. Over the years, public opinion has become deeply polarized. Some people remain empathetic toward the McCanns, recognizing them as grieving parents who lost their daughter under unimaginable circumstances. Others are firmly convinced that the parents were involved, pointing to perceived emotional flatness or unexplained behavioral details. One contributor to the discussion summarized it well: Let's stop trying to shame and vilify people because their opinion differs from our own. Ultimately, everyone here should be united in wanting justice for Madeleine. Yet unity has proven difficult in a case like this largely because of how people absorb and process narratives. In an era where being right often takes precedence over being fair, many online discussions devolve into personal attacks, rigid camps, and groupthink. The polarization has also been fueled by echo chambers, where one side of the argument is reinforced through selective sharing of media, interviews, or even altered images. In such an environment, confirmation bias flourishes. Perhaps the most damaging critique lobbed at Kate and Jerry McCann is the claim that they appeared too calm, too composed, or emotionally detached. From the very beginning, online users dissected their press appearances, analyzing micro-expressions, pauses, and phrasing. The conclusion for many: something was off. If you don't like people being armchair detectives, don't enter subreddits discussing crimes. One Reddit user quipped, "The problem isn't amateur analysis itself, it's that this kind of analysis often confuses trauma responses with guilt." People react to trauma in vastly different ways. While some break down or become visibly distressed, others shut down emotionally, go numb, or adopt hyper-rational behavior as a coping mechanism. Psychologists have long warned that visible grief is not a reliable metric for internal suffering. What might look like cold behavior could in fact be clinical dissociation or a desperate attempt to remain functional for the sake of surviving the situation. But online, such nuance rarely survives. People interpret behavior in binary terms: you're either authentic or hiding something. This fundamental misunderstanding has helped transform a complex psychological tragedy into a moral drama where appearance equals truth. Perhaps the most troubling evolution of the McCann case has been its transformation into public entertainment. The story has become a cultural touchstone referenced in jokes, conspiracy boards, and endless YouTube exposes. The idea that public fascination can distort or hinder justice is not new, but in the McCann case, it has become especially potent. As one quote succinctly put it, instead of compassion, they have been at the center of a polarizing theory that refuses to die. It's a tragic irony. The parents of a missing child, already suffering, have been made into characters in a speculative fiction written by the masses. Social media rewards hot takes, not humility. It values certainty over complexity. And so the McCanns are caught in an eternal loop, not because of what they did, but because of what they didn't do correctly. In the eyes of the public, the Madeleine McCann case is still open. And until answers are found, every theory, every suspect should be held to the same standard of legal scrutiny. But the emotional conviction of the McCanns is not about justice. It's about projection, suspicion, and a human desire to make sense of the senseless. Without realizing it, much of the world became both jury and executioner driven not by facts, but by facial expressions and framed narratives. That is not justice. That is emotional theater. And perhaps, it's time to ask ourselves a harder question. Have we all been looking too hard for a villain? Simply because the truth is too unbearable to accept. There is a moment in every complex crime case when the public no longer asks, "What happened?" but instead, "Who do we blame?" In the case of Madeleine McCann, that question was answered by millions in unison: the parents. But what if we turned that narrative on its head? What if, instead of examining the McCanns through the lens of suspicion, we tried, for once, to step into their shoes? The pain of losing a child is unimaginable. But now imagine that in the midst of your grief, you are suddenly accused of causing it. Not by a court of law, not through forensic evidence, but through public opinion fueled by tabloids, speculation, and digital hysteria. Every action you take is dissected and judged. You don't cry enough on camera. You must be guilty. You clean your daughter's stuffed animal, trying to hold onto something familiar in your grief. People say it's a sign of staging. Your spontaneous outcry, "They've taken Madeleine," born of pure panic, is reframed by strangers as suspicious, as if you had prior knowledge of a crime you allegedly committed. You are no longer allowed to be a victim. Your identity is rewritten as a suspect, and there is no trial, no jury, just a global audience waiting to condemn you, not because of what you did, but because of how you looked while doing it. Instead of receiving the empathy typically offered to grieving parents, Jerry and Kate McCann were forced into a battle for their own reputation. They had to hire lawyers, public relations experts, and private investigators just to protect themselves from the wildfire of false accusations, all while trying to locate their missing daughter. They set up the Find Madeleine campaign to keep the search alive, but even that was viewed with suspicion. Conspiracy theorists accused them of profiting from tragedy, of manipulating the press, of building a brand around a lie. And yet, the McCanns have never had a criminal record, never failed a polygraph, never been charged with any crime. Still, they've spent nearly 20 years defending themselves against a crime they were never proven to have committed. When parents are truly responsible for the disappearance or death of their children, distinct behavioral patterns tend to emerge, and they're often hard to miss. In the case of Chris Watts, he told repeated lies, manipulated the narrative, and ultimately confessed, backed by DNA and CCTV footage. Casey Anthony, after her daughter vanished, was seen partying, gave inconsistent statements, and failed to report her child missing, raising immediate suspicions supported by forensic inconsistencies. But then there are the McCanns. They cooperated with authorities, remained in the public eye, and persistently searched for their daughter, all without a single piece of incriminating DNA, witness testimony, or direct forensic evidence ever surfacing against them. And yet, while Watts and Anthony were rightfully scrutinized based on actions and evidence, the McCanns became suspects in the court of public opinion, largely because of how they appeared. Their transparency and desperation, rather than being seen as the behavior of devastated parents, were twisted into suspicion. In a cruel twist of logic, their very efforts to find Madeleine became the reason people assumed they had something to hide. In the early hours of May 4, 2007, Kate and Jerry McCann were thrust into every parent's worst nightmare. Their daughter, who had been tucked in just an hour earlier, was gone. What followed wasn't just a search, it was a spiral of chaos. They were questioned by police, followed by journalists, analyzed by body language experts, and theorized about in thousands of online forums. And still, they kept going. They launched a website. They spoke at press conferences. They met with politicians, investigators, and victims' advocates, not to hide but to keep Madeleine's name alive in the hope that one day, she would come home. Their battle wasn't only for justice. It became a battle to be heard, to be believed, and to be allowed to grieve without being vilified. 17 years later, Jerry and Kate McCann have not given up. They still run the Find Madeleine campaign. They still do interviews. They still speak publicly about their daughter. And yes, they still hope. Through courtrooms, media storms, online, and investigative dead ends, they've held on. They didn't have to. No one is forcing them to stay in the spotlight. If they were guilty, if their mission was to get away with it, they could have faded from public view, as most guilty people do. But they didn't. They chose the harder path, one where every step invites more scrutiny, but also keeps Madeleine's memory alive. So ask yourself, honestly, if you were in their shoes, what would you have done differently? Would you have cried harder on television? Would you have said different words in the moment of shock? Would you have been able to fight for your child and your dignity simultaneously under the crushing weight of public suspicion? Before we judge, before we speculate, before we accuse, maybe we should try something harder: empathy. Because sometimes the most extraordinary evidence is the strength it takes to keep going, even when the world has already made up its mind.